He climbed into the cockpit knowing only one thing: German bombers were somewhere in the darkness. He had no radio, no lights, no one to guide him home. Just a Sopwith Camel, a machine gun, and the cold night sky. 6 years earlier, Robert Alexander Little had been selling medical books in Melbourne because his own country wouldn't teach him to fly. Now, at just 22, he was about to become Australia's deadliest fighter pilot. But there was something he didn't know. In less than 20 minutes, Robert Little would be dead. And before that happened, he was about to hunt German bombers alone in the darkness. Stay with us to discover how an ordinary Australian book salesman became a legendary ace of World War I.
A man is climbing into a single-seat fighter. It is dark. He is alone. The aeroplane has no lights. It has no radio. He is going up to look for German bombers that he cannot see. And 6 years ago, he was selling medical books for his father in a quiet suburb of Melbourne because his own country would not teach him to fly. His name is Robert Alexander Little. He is 22 years old. In about 20 minutes, he will officially be the deadliest pilot Australia has ever produced. And in about 20 minutes, he will be dead. He does not know that. Nobody does. Not the mechanics standing back from the propeller in the moonlight. Not the pilots waiting for the engine to catch. Not his wife Vera, asleep somewhere far from here, in a little rented flat. Not his baby son, whose nickname is painted in white letters on the side of another aeroplane, a few hangars away. It is a night in late May, 1918, and no one on this airfield knows that the man swinging himself into the cockpit is about to be the last man they see alive. The mechanic pulls the propeller through. The engine coughs, spits, catches. The whole aeroplane shakes on its wheels. Blue exhaust flame stutters back along the fuselage. Castor oil, hot metal, dope, petrol. All the smells of a Sopwith Camel starting on a cold French field. He waves the trucks away. He taxis out into the moonlight, a small, dark shape against a landscape washed in silver. He is not thinking about the shop in Melbourne right now, but we should be, because in a strange way, that shop is the reason he is here. His father, James Little, was a Scotsman. James had come out to Australia and set up a small business in Collins Street in the middle of Melbourne, selling books to doctors. Not novels, not popular history, medical textbooks, surgical textbooks, anatomy books, the kind of heavy cloth-bound volumes that go in the shelves behind a surgeon's desk. It was a specialized trade. It required a certain kind of man to walk into a doctor's consulting rooms and place 3 or 4 of these volumes on the desk and ask for an order. James Little was that kind of man. He was reliable. He was patient. He had a Scottish sense that a job worth doing was worth doing methodically. He married. He had 4 children. Robert Alexander was the eldest son, born on the 19th of July, 1895, in the suburb of Hawthorne. The family called him Bob when he was very small, and Alec when he was a boy, and later, when he was in the Royal Naval Air Service, his brother pilots would call him Ricky, after the mongoose in the Kipling story that kills the cobras. He would grow up to be all 3 of those men. He was sent to Camberwell Grammar School, then to Scotch College, which is one of the great Presbyterian schools of Melbourne. He was not a scholar. He was not lazy either. He was one of those boys who works honestly at his lessons and finishes in the middle of the class and takes extra lessons in boxing on the side. He learned French well enough that he could later use it behind the lines in a French village to find a girl to dance with. He was a good swimmer. He was compact and physically brave, and he had that faintly restless quality that fathers of steady sons sometimes worry about. He left school at 15, not for glory, for work. He joined his father's business as a commercial traveler. That is the polite Victorian term for a door-to-door salesman. He would sit in the waiting room while the doctor finished with a patient. He would open his case. He would talk about the new edition of Gray's Anatomy. He would take an order for 2 guineas and write it in a small ledger. Then he would move on to the next surgery. It sounds ordinary. It was ordinary. That is the point. The greatest fighter pilot Australia has ever produced spent his early manhood knocking on the doors of Melbourne doctors, selling them anatomy books, and going home at night to a bed in his father's house. Later, When men who had flown with him tried to explain what made him different in the air, they very often came back to this. He had, they said, no drama in him. He did not shout. He did not swagger. He did the thing that had to be done, and he did it the same way whether he had slept or not, whether he had eaten or not, whether he had a Vickers gun that was working properly or a Vickers gun that was jamming every third round. He was, in every practical sense, a working man. He carried the war in the same steady sample case in which he had once carried Gray's Anatomy through the country towns of Victoria. He simply, in his own quiet way, went to work every morning, and one of the jobs turned out to be shooting down German aeroplanes. His father's shop stood at a good address near the top end of Collins Street, in the block where the doctors and the barristers had their rooms. In the front window, there were leather-bound editions and colored medical plates. Inside, the air smelled of paper and the polish they used on the shelves. James kept a small back office where he did his accounts. Alec used to sit at the desk in that back office and copy out invoices in his neat, careful handwriting. He used to fold circulars into envelopes for the country doctors. He used to be sent to the post office with a leather bag of correspondence at the end of the day. On the wall of the office, there was a framed print of a sailing ship. Sometimes, in later years, his younger brother James would remember Alec, at 14 or 15, standing in front of that print with a slightly faraway look and being called back into the room by their father, asking him whether he had entered the last consignment into the ledger. But there was one thing that was not ordinary about him at all. He wanted to fly. He had wanted to fly since he was a boy. In 1910, when Alec was 14 years old, the American showman Harry Houdini had come to Australia to prove that he was the first man to fly a heavier-than-air machine in the Southern Hemisphere. He rose from a paddock at a place called Digger's Rest, just outside Melbourne, in a Voisin biplane, and the crowds who saw it never forgot it. There is a good chance that a boy called Alec Little was in that crowd. Certainly, from that moment onwards, everyone in his family remembered him as a boy who was interested in aeroplanes, in a way that most Australians in 1910 simply were not. Because in 1910, most Australians had never seen an aeroplane, and most of them did not particularly want to. Alec did. He climbs now, out of the airfield at Issel-les-Hameaux. Somewhere below him, in the darkness, are the trenches and the field hospitals and the sleeping villages of the Somme. The camel gains height reluctantly. It always does. It is a short, brutal little machine, all engine and guns and pilot, and it climbs like it is being pulled up on a rope. He watches the moon lift over his upper wing. He can hear the note of the rotary engine settle into a steady snarl. His breath is a small cloud in front of his face. It is very cold. At 2,000 feet, he begins to look, not with his eyes exactly, but with the corner of his eyes, and with his ears, which is what night flyers in 1918 were reduced to. A Gotha bomber, at night, does not carry lights. Its exhaust flares, but only a little. Its engines make a heavy droning noise, but at any distance, the sound is lost inside the sound of your own engine. To find one, a pilot had to trust the searchlight beams on the ground. When the beams swung and locked onto something high, he had to fly towards that pinned insect of light and hope to arrive before it wriggled free. He is a very good hunter. That is what all the reports say, even the ones that dislike him. By the time 1915 came around, Alec Little was 19 years old, still selling medical books, and increasingly certain that this could not be his whole life. He tried to join the Central Flying School at Point Cook, which was the only military flying school in Australia. There were 4 places available in the whole country. He was not one of the 4. Nobody quite knows why. Perhaps he was not well enough educated. Perhaps he did not know the right people. He was, after all, a book salesman from a suburban school, not the son of a Melbourne judge, So he did the thing he was going to keep doing for the rest of his short life. He paid for it himself. On the 27th of July, 1915, Alec Little boarded a ship in Melbourne bound for England. He had no promise of a commission. He had no guarantee that anyone in England would train him either. He had his own fare and, most likely, some help from his father, whose steady book-selling had put a small amount of money aside. The Scotch Collegian, the school magazine, later said that James paid for his son's ticket. It seems plausible. James Little was the kind of father who would. The ship carried him across the Indian Ocean and up the Suez and through the Mediterranean and into the Channel. He watched the ports go by. He was, as far as anyone can tell, alone. He was 20 years old. He had been out of Australia for the first time. He was going, at his own expense, to a war on the other side of the world, on the chance that he might be allowed to fly. He arrived in England. He went to Hendon, on the outskirts of London, and he paid for his own flying lessons. Hendon in that summer was the closest thing Britain had to a civilian flying school. You put down money, you climbed into a small trainer, you learned to keep the wings level and the nose straight, and to bounce gently onto a grass strip. On the 27th of October, 1915, Robert Alexander Little was granted his pilot's certificate. He was now, officially, an aviator. He had spent a large part of the past year and a large part of his family's savings to become one, and now he had to sell himself again. He walked into the recruiting offices of the Royal Naval Air Service and offered his services. This time he was taken. In 1916, he was commissioned and sent to Dunkirk, on the Belgian coast, to fly bombing raids in slow, angular Bristol Scouts and Sopwith 1.5 strutters. That is where his war began, not in combat, in work. He droned over the trenches. He carried small bombs on rails under his machine. He came back with his aeroplane peppered with shrapnel. Or he did not come back at all. The men he flew with kept dying. He kept not dying. He was patient in the same steady way his father was patient. Later, this would matter. The bombing raids out of Dunkirk were not glamorous work. The aeroplanes were slow. The pilot sat in a wicker seat, low behind the engine cowling, with the wind coming over the windshield, straight into his face. In winter, a man could come back from a 2-hour patrol so cold that he had to be lifted out of the cockpit by the ground crew. The engines seized. The guns froze. A pilot who could get his machine into the air, drop his bombs in roughly the right field, and get his machine home in one piece was doing his job. Little did his job. He watched his friends fly out of the aerodrome in the morning and not come back at tea time. He wrote polite letters to their families. He wrote to his father in Melbourne once a week, in the same steady, unshowy handwriting he had used to enter medical invoices. He wrote to Vera whenever he could. He almost never wrote about the fear. He wrote about the food and the weather, and a French farm cat that had adopted his hut. At 3,000 feet, the sky is huge. There are the searchlights 20 miles off, sweeping the low cloud in long, tired arcs. The camel bucks in the cold air. He puts the nose towards where the lights are working. He is now, in every practical sense, alone in the world. Nobody can talk to him. Nobody can help him. If his engine stops, he will have to try to land on whatever field the moon shows him. He thinks of Vera, perhaps. He does not have to think of her, because she is always at the back of his mind now. He had met her in the small window of shore leave he was allowed in the middle of 1916. Her name was Vera Field. She was English. She lived in Dover. He was a young Australian pilot in a naval uniform, walking around the town with his hat pushed back. It was, by all accounts, a whirlwind. They married in September of 1916 at the registry office in Dover. He was 21. She was younger. They had known each other for weeks, not months. There are hundreds of stories like it from that war. Most of them ended in a telegram. A month later, in October of 1916, he was posted to No. 8 Naval Squadron on the Western Front, flying a new machine called the Sopwith Pup. The Pup was a small, beautiful, honest little aeroplane. It had a single machine gun that fired through the propeller. It could climb like a bird and turn inside almost anything the Germans had. He liked it. On the 23rd of November, 1916, he was credited with his first victory. A German two-seater brought down inside the German lines, both crewmen killed. It was not, in his own words afterwards, a satisfying thing. It was a job of work. He was quite matter-of-fact about it. In the letter he wrote home to his father.
He climbed into the cockpit knowing only one thing. German bombers were somewhere in the darkness. He had no radio, no lights, no one to guide him home. Just a Sopwith camel, a machine gun, and the cold night sky. 6 years earlier, Robert Alexander Little had been selling medical books in Melbourne because his own country wouldn't teach him to fly. Now, at just 22, he was about to become Australia's deadliest fighter pilot. But there was something he didn't know. In less than 20 minutes, Robert Little would be dead. And before that happened, he was about to hunt German bombers alone in the darkness. Stay with us to discover how an ordinary Australian book salesman became a legendary ace of World War I.
He wrote to say that despite what the newspapers seemed to be saying, the Germans did not have any particular mastery of the air. He noticed. He observed. He did not exaggerate. He wrote like a man used to writing invoices. By the following March, he had 4 confirmed victories in the Sopwith Pup. On the strength of them, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. The citation said the usual things about conspicuous bravery in successfully attacking and bringing down hostile machines. He was pleased about it. He wrote home to Melbourne with the news. His father framed the letter. Somewhere out on the Great Dividing Range, doctors in country towns picked up their copy of the paper and read that the young little boy, the one who used to come round with the sample case, had shot down 4 German aeroplanes. Then, in April 1917, his squadron was given a new aeroplane. It was called the Sopwith Triplane, and it changed his life. The triplane looked ridiculous. It had 3 narrow wings stacked on top of each other, all of them fitted with ailerons. It looked like something a child would draw, but it climbed better than anything else in the sky. It rolled faster. It turned tighter. It had a single Vickers gun on the cowling, and it fired through the propeller. In the right hands, it was a scalpel. He was given a particular airframe. Its serial number was N5493. He did what he always did with a machine that was his to fly. He looked at it hard, and then he changed it. He had the pilot's seat moved forward by 10 inches. That made the aeroplane nose-heavy. It made it harder for a normal pilot to trim, and it made the machine want to dive. It made it so out of the standard rig that other pilots in the squadron could not really fly it. But it made it dive faster than any other triplane in France, and it made the guns aim easier at close range. He also, at least once, had the wing struts trimmed with streamers in the colors of Scotch College, cardinal red, gold and blue. And on the front of the fuselage, in white paint just below the cockpit rim, he had someone letter one word, Blymp. It was the nickname of his son. The boy had been born the year before. Little called him Blymp, for reasons that only a young father knows. It was a joke, or half a joke, and it had stuck. He wrote to Vera about him constantly. When she sent him a photograph, he pinned it up in his hut. And when they gave him the aeroplane that would carry him through the greatest run of his career, he put the boy's name on it. He is at 4,000 feet now. The Camel is steady. The engine note is high and constant. His hands are cold inside their gloves, and his face above the muffler is cold too. His eyes ache from staring into the distance. Somewhere out there, above Saint-Omer, the searchlights are still crawling, and there is a heavy vibration in the air that is not his engine. It is the double drone of the Gotha's Mercedes motors, unsynchronized, coming and going in slow waves. He tips the Camel gently and starts to climb again. In April of 1917, the triplane and Robert Alexander Little went to work. He did not fly like the other pilots. Most fighter pilots in that war had been taught the same simple lesson. Come out of the sun. Fire from as far away as your guns would carry. Do not close beyond about 200 yards. If you closed too far, you lost the geometry of the fight, and you were as likely to shoot yourself in the propeller as you were to hit anything. Little ignored all of this. He preferred to be so close to the enemy that he could see the man's face in the observer's cockpit. He liked to fire at what British sailors used to call cricket pitch range. About 15 or 20 feet, he would put his machine underneath the belly of a 2-seater, close as if he were tucking a car up to the curb, and fire straight up. He would fly through the wreckage. He would come out the other side with fabric wrapped round his undercarriage and someone else's blood on his goggles. He collided with an albatross once. Actually hit it. He clipped the German's tailplane with his own undercarriage. He landed with a cracked undercarriage and had it fixed, and was flying again by the afternoon. On another day in April 1917, alone at the front, he found himself in combat with 11 German aeroplanes at once. He did not run. He weaved, he climbed, he fired at whichever one came at him. British anti-aircraft gunners on the ground watched him do it, and later reported that the Australians' triplane had completely outmaneuvered the enemy formation, which had finally, in exasperation, broken off and gone home. That is a very rare thing to see written into an official record. On another day, he shot down a two-seater and followed it to the ground and landed alongside it and captured the crew personally with his service pistol. He turned his own aeroplane over in the ditch as he taxied to a stop. The German pilot, walking towards him with his hands up, looked at the upside-down Sopwith and remarked, in reasonable English, that it rather looked as if he had shot little down and not the other way round. On another day, his Vickers gun jammed. He was over Allied lines. He landed in a field. He climbed out. He unstuck the round from the breech with a hammer. He climbed back in, took off, and went back up to keep hunting. By the middle of July, 1917, the triplane had given him 24 victories. That is a number worth pausing on. He had, in less than 4 months, on top of the 4 he already had in the Pup, put 24 German aeroplanes down. There were 4 separate days in that period on which he had shot down 2 aeroplanes in one day. He was, in that spring and summer of 1917, the deadliest pilot in his squadron, by some distance. He was the second highest scoring pilot ever to fly a triplane, second only to a young Canadian called Raymond Collishaw, who was flying an all-black one called Black Maria. Collishaw noticed him. That would matter later. Then, in July of 1917, the triplanes were replaced by Sopwith Camels. The Camel was faster than the triplane. It was more agile in the hands of a very good pilot and completely lethal to a bad one. It killed more of its own pilots in training than any other British fighter of the war. Little took to it as if he had been born on it. In 1 month, he added 10 more kills. By the time his commanders finally pulled him out of the line for rest, in the middle of 1917, he had 38 confirmed victories. He was one of the highest-scoring pilots on the Western Front. They sent him back to England. They gave him a chest full of ribbons, the Distinguished Service Order and Bar, the Distinguished Service Cross and Bar, a mention in dispatches, the French Croix de Guerre with star. They promoted him to flight lieutenant. They offered him a training post, well behind the line, teaching new pilots at a school in England. He would live in a comfortable mess. He would eat regular meals. He would see Vera and the baby whenever he liked. He would probably survive the war. In the calculation that any sensible man would have made in 1918, he had done his share. He had done, in fact, more than any 3 normal men's share. He said no. We do not know exactly what he wrote or said when he refused it. He was not a man for grand speeches. He simply, in the same steady, methodical way in which he had once carried medical books round Melbourne, put in the papers to go back to the front. He is a very hard man to explain here. He was not a fanatic. He was not, from anything anyone ever wrote about him, a man in love with killing. His squadron leader, Raymond Collishaw, who would know, described him a few years later as a man who was bold and aggressive and courageous, yet also gentle and kindly, and one of the most chivalrous warriors he had ever known. He was, said Collishaw, incapable of leaving a fight alone. Once he was in the air, he had to be in the fight. He was, in the words of one of his descendants, brave but reckless. Perhaps it was simply this. There was a war on. His friends were in it. He was very good at it. Someone had to fly the aeroplanes. The younger pilots he was supposed to teach in England were going to die if there were not experienced flight leaders in France to keep them alive. And he had a wife and a baby son named Blymp, and every German bomber that reached the Channel was one that might drop its bombs on Dover. He went back. In March of 1918, he was posted to No. 3 Naval Squadron, which was commanded by Raymond Collishaw, the Canadian he had chased for the triplane record. The squadron flew Camels. On the 1st of April, 1918, the Royal Naval Air Service and the Royal Flying Corps were folded together into the new Royal Air Force. No. 3 Naval Squadron became No. 203 Squadron, Royal Air Force. His new rank was captain. He kept flying, and he kept shooting things down. On the 1st of April, the day the RAF was born, he shot down a Fokker triplane. By the middle of May, he had added 9 more victories to his official tally, 47 confirmed, 20 destroyed, 2 captured, 25 sent down out of control in the polite official language of the day. On the 21st of April, 1918, he had had his closest scrape. He had picked the last aeroplane out of a formation of 12 Fokkers from a squadron called Jasta Bulky. 6 of them had turned and come back at him. In the space of about a minute, they had shot away his rudder cables and put bullets through his engine. His camel had gone into a steep dive and headed for the ground north of a wood called the Forest of Nieppe. He had unstrapped himself because he preferred to be thrown clear than trapped in a burning aeroplane on the ground. At the last moment, the camel flattened out with a jerk that would have snapped a normal man's spine, and he was thrown out into a field, sore, badly bruised, but alive. The German pilot who put him down was called Friedrich Amann that afternoon. Over the Somme, a Canadian pilot in a Sopwith camel called Roy Brown was credited with shooting down Manfred von Richthofen. So on the same April day that the Red Baron died, Robert Little was thrown out of his own aircraft in a French field and survived. He was flying again within days. That was the thing about him that his squadron mates could not quite explain. Any other pilot who had been thrown out of a camel in a field, after being chased down through a formation of 6 Fokkers, would have wanted a week, at least, to think about it. Little did not. He wanted to be back in the air the next morning. There is a story that he spent that first evening sitting in the mess with a glass of watered whiskey, and that when someone asked him what it had been like coming down, he replied only that he had been quite lucky and would prefer another glass. Then he went to bed and slept without moving. And at breakfast, he asked whether they had a spare aeroplane for him. Now he is at 5,000 feet. The searchlights below him are working harder, and now, faintly, he can see what they are hunting. It is a slim glint of pale metal, high up against the moon. A Gotha, 2 engines, heavy, deliberate, dropping bombs somewhere over the town of St. Omer. He does not think, he simply pushes the nose forward and begins to close. He is doing what he always did. He is going to come very, very near. He is going to fire at cricket pitch range. Behind him, at the airfield he has just left, there is a story that has to be told, because the night of the 27th of May, 1918, was not an ordinary night for number 203 Squadron. Raymond Collishaw, the commanding officer, was on leave in England. Little was in temporary command. When word came in that Gothas were bombing the town of St. Omer, it was Little who took the decision. He gave the order to prepare his own camel for action. He asked, before he taxied out, that a line of flares be lit on the field when they heard his engine coming back, so that he had somewhere to land. Then he took off, alone, at 9 o'clock in the evening, without lights, on a full moon. There were, as far as we can tell, no other British fighters up, just him. He is now perhaps 600 yards below and behind the Gotha. He is coming up on its tail. The German gunners have not seen him. The Gotha's engine noise is much bigger than his. It drowns him out. He is doing everything right. He is drifting into the black slice of sky just under the Gotha's rudder, the place where its own tailplane hides him from its rear gunner. In another 20 seconds, he will be 10 feet away from the enemy and firing his twin Vickers into its belly. In another 30 seconds, the aeroplane will be falling in flames into some wood on the ground, and he will be climbing back for home. Then, on the ground, a young man on a searchlight crew turns his wheel. The beam swings. It hunts. It finds the Gotha, loses it, finds it again. And then, purely because Little is directly beneath the bomber and the beam is trying to hold the bomber in it, the light finds him too. For perhaps 2 seconds, the Sopwith Camel with the 22-year-old Australian in it, hanging in the sky over Noe, is lit up as bright as a stage. There is a burst of machine gun fire from somewhere. Whether it comes from the Gotha's rear gunner, who has now seen the fighter under his tail, or from a light anti-aircraft gun on the ground, no one will ever be sure. It does not matter which. It is one burst. One bullet finds him. It passes through his right thigh, and it passes through his left thigh, and it passes through his groin. In the black cockpit, in the roar of the engine, alone in the searchlight, Robert Little goes into shock. He is a very good pilot. Even now, in that first cold minute, with his blood soaking into the seat, he does not spin. He does not lose control. He gets the nose of the camel down. He turns away from the beam. He looks below him for a field. There is a moonbright meadow near a village called Noah. He picks it. He puts the camel down on it. It is not a bad landing, given the circumstances. He does not turn over. He does not burn. The aeroplane comes to a stop in the grass at some point after midnight. We do not know what he did in the next hour. We know that he was still alive. We know that he could not walk. We know that no one was coming, because no one on the ground knew where he had gone. 9 o'clock on a moonlit night in 1918, alone, in a field, with 2 wounds in the thighs and 1 in the groin, a very long way from any doctor. He was bleeding fast. He had all his life been a patient man. We can guess a little. We can guess that when the engine stopped and the propeller ticked to a standstill, he sat for a moment in the enormous silence and heard the wind moving in the grass. We can guess that he looked at his hands, which had been on the control column, and saw that they were shaking and wondered why. We can guess that he tried to shift his weight and could not. We can guess that he undid his flying jacket to look at his legs and saw the dark stain going down into his boots, and understood then, in the same practical way in which he had always understood things, what was happening to him. We can guess that he thought about Vera. We can guess that he thought about the boy. We can guess that he sat with his head against the padded rim of the cockpit and watched the moon slide across the field, and that at some quiet hour before dawn he simply, without any fuss, went to sleep. That is guessing. What is not guessing is that when the gendarme found him, his hands were still on the controls. At first light on the morning of the 28th of May, a French country policeman, a gendarme on his rounds, walked along the lane near No and saw a camel sitting in a field. He came over to it. He looked into the cockpit. In it was a young man in a British flying uniform, his hands still on the controls, quite dead. There was a great deal of blood on the seat and on the floor of the cockpit. Beside him, in a small pocket, was the photograph of a young woman and a small boy that he always carried. On the ground, the gendarme's boots left prints in the wet grass. On the fuselage, in the daylight now, one could read the squadron markings and the pilot's name. Captain R.A., Little Royal Air Force. He had bled to death alone in a French field. Sometime in the small hours of the morning, while his young son slept peacefully in England, they buried him in the British cemetery at Wavans, in the Pas de Calais, not very far from the little village where he had come down. His grave is one of the smaller ones, near a hedge, in a corner of France, that will forever be marked with the graves of very young men. On his headstone, at his widow's request, is written, in the language of a soldier's wife, Croix de Guerre with star, his ever-loving wife and little son Blymp, also his loving father. Somewhere far away, in the aerodrome at Issel-les-Hameaux, at 4 in the morning the flare-path lights had gone dark. His engine had not come back. Someone had gone into his hut and taken his letters down off the wall. The men of number 203 Squadron unbolted the propeller from what was left of his triplane, the machine he had flown with Blymp painted on the side. They sent it home to Vera in a wooden crate. She had it made into a clock, with the hub of the propeller in the middle, so that time itself would tick out from the center of the wooden blade that had carried him through most of the fighting of his life. She took the clock and the letters and their son back home to Australia. The clock is now in the Australian War Memorial in Canberra. So is the picture. So is his name, in bronze, on the roll of honor of Australians who never came home. 47 confirmed victories. Australia's highest-scoring pilot of the First World War. 8th among all pilots of the whole British Empire. 14th among all pilots on any side of the war. Not for the whole war either. In a bit more than a year and a half of actual combat flying, some researchers, going back over the records, argue that another Australian, Roderick Dallas, may in fact have shot down more aeroplanes than Little did. Dallas's official count was 39, but modern historians who have gone through his combat reports and the German loss records for the same days say that his real total may have been in the 50s. If that is right, then Little is not the highest-scoring Australian pilot of the war. He is the second. It is worth being honest about that. It does not change what he did. It does not change what he chose. It does not change the fact that on the night of the 27th of May, 1918, he was the man who took off alone at 9 o'clock at night, without lights, without a radio, without help, to try to keep the bombs off a French town. Vera Little sailed back to Australia after the war. She took Blymp with her. She lived in Melbourne. She did not remarry for many years. She kept his photographs in a drawer, and she raised her son. His father, James, kept the family business going in Collins Street for as long as he could. The medical books kept selling in that quiet Presbyterian way. He kept his son's photograph on the mantelpiece. An old suitcase turned up in a rubbish tip in the Queensland town of Texas, decades later, in our own century. Inside it were a flying helmet, a pair of goggles, a silk shirt, a camel hair vest, some plain old-fashioned underwear, and a small folded bunch of pressed flowers. The helmet was marked, in ink, R.A. Little, Windsor, Victoria, Australia. He had lived at 113 Punt Road, Windsor, before he went. Someone had put his things away in the suitcase, and someone else, generations later, had thrown them out. The suitcase found its way back to the Australian Society of World War I Aero Historians, and the helmet is safe now. That is more or less what happens to a life. The medals go to the museum. The clock goes to the museum. The photographs go into a drawer. The helmet goes into a suitcase. Everything else has to be reassembled, later, by strangers, from what people wrote down at the time. So this is what we can say for certain about him. He was a Melbourne boy who sold medical books. He was a husband who married in a hurry in a seaside town. He was a father who painted his son's baby name on the side of an aeroplane. He was a pilot who liked to fly so close that the enemy could see his face. He was a man who was offered a safe posting in the middle of a war he had already fought harder than almost anyone, and who turned it down and went back. He was a captain who, on the last night of his life, took command of a squadron whose commanding officer was on leave, took his own camel out alone at 9 o'clock in the evening into a full moon to try to keep bombers off a French town he did not live in. He was 22 years old, paid his own passage to England, because his own country could not find him a place. He paid for his own lessons, because there was no one else to pay for them. He went into a war he did not have to go into, and he stayed in a war he was told he had done enough in. He kept flying because he was, in the end, one of those men who cannot walk away from a job of work while it is still going. He was his father's son. He was a book salesman who happened to be one of the most gifted killers the sky ever saw, and who, in the moments between kills, wrote patient, careful letters to a wife in a rented flat in Dover about a boy he called Blymp. He was not the Red Baron. He was not Billy Bishop. He does not have a face on a postage stamp. There is a building at the Australian Defence Force Academy with his name on it. There is a wooden cross in a Pas de Calais churchyard, and beside it, a headstone with a widow's inscription. There is a clock in Canberra made from a Sopwith Triplane propeller that has been ticking, one blade at a time, for more than a century. That is where the story ends. It ends where all of them end. In a field, in a foreign country, in a small hour of a moonlit morning. It ends with a young man dying alone. It ends with a widow and a son sailing home to Melbourne on a ship that carried the medals in a small case in her cabin, and the boy playing on the deck. But it started somewhere else. It started in a shop in Collins Street, Melbourne, where a Scotsman sold medical books. It started with a small boy in 1910, looking up at a Voisin biplane taking off from a paddock at Digger's Rest. It started with a school report card that said he was middle of the class. It started with a 15-year-old salesman knocking on doctors' doors with a case full of anatomy books. It started with a 19-year-old boy paying his own steamer fare across the world. It started with a young father in a canvas hangar in France, watching a man in overalls paint a single word onto the side of a triplane, Blymp. He was a salesman from Melbourne. He was a father. He was a husband. He was, by any honest reckoning of skill and courage and cold, patient, methodical work, one of the 2 or 3 deadliest men Australia ever put into an aeroplane. He was 22 years old, and in about 20 minutes, from the moment he first climbed into his cockpit that evening, he was dead.